This evening on The Rock Newman Show, Ben Carson's top advisor, television executive, and columnist Armstrong Williams joins me to discuss Carson's decision to steer clear of a position in Donald Trump's administration, how the president-elect can bring real change to America, and he'll also fill us in on the Black GOP perspective. That's coming up right now on The Rock Newman Show. Welcome to The Rock Newman Show from the campus of historic Howard University, located in the nation's capital. I'm Rock Newman, and it is my desire to inspire you with personal stories of extraordinary achievement. Armstrong Williams is a political pundit, TV executive, and columnist who serves as top advisor to Ben Carson and has maintained a solid career in TV and politics. He joins me now to weigh in on Ben Carson's decision to forego a spot in Trump's administration, the Republican agenda with Trump as commander-in-chief, and the poll-purging controversies that plagued the 2016 election. Armstrong, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule for joining us here today.
My pleasure.
You know, when I called you and called your office to ask if you might be able to join us today, I really did so praying that you would do it, that you would be available. And I did that for many reasons, some of which are there right now after the election of Donald Trump, just last week. There is a divide in the country that is so crystal clear. And on opposite sides of that divide, you have individuals, you have families that are yelling at each other. How could you be so stupid? How could you be so ridiculous to vote for a con man? And the other side saying all of the things that the other side says about Hillary Clinton. I can't imagine that you would have voted for a Hillary Clinton. And so part of what I want to try to explore with you, and why I was hoping you would be the person that would be able to join us today, because I think you have a unique perspective and an ability to be able to articulate why there is such a divide, one, and then another element that I wanted to investigate with you, to explore with you, was the mindset of African Americans, black folks, who are conservative Republicans. I wanted to really try to understand why a minority of African Americans, and a real minority, the split probably is somewhere 90-10, but that the 10% of African Americans that are conservative and Republican, who are so often vilified by the 90%, what is it that, and I'll start with this, what is it that prompts, that inspires that 10% to seriously go against the grain of the race of people that they belong to? And what is that mindset that would have that 10% to support Trump, who has been called racist, bigoted, along with many other names? So if we could start there to try to get, I want to understand, and I want our viewing audience to understand how you respond to that.
Well, belonging to one's race is a fallacy.
Okay.
It only exists in the mind and is reinforced by media, your circle of influence, and if that's the conversation you choose to dwell on. Most people have reached sort of an enlightenment that what unites people together are their values and their virtues. If I'm a man of wealth, obviously I'm going to care about taxes. I'm going to care about overregulation. I'm going to care about whether or not my investments are going to be taxed in sort of a burdensome way. If I am a teacher in the classroom, discipline, creating an environment where children learn, getting the best education possible, making sure there are not barriers to that education, making sure that as a parent that my children has the best chance of surviving and becoming contributing citizens to this country. I think what happens is that there are people who believe, if you look at what happened, particularly with what has happened in Baltimore and Ferguson and these other places, that if it happens to someone black, it can happen to you. I'm going to shock people. See, I don't believe that. I don't think we're groups. I think we're individuals. I think just because something happens to you, I think race plays a role. Yes, no question about it. There's a lot of ignorance. There's a lot of stereotyping. But I think there's far less than that, than people actually stopping you and things happening to you because of your choices and because of your behavior. Mm-hmm. And so I think as more and more people begin to believe that race is not a handicap for them, that you don't have to be 3 times as good to make it in America. All you have to do is be good. All you have to do is make good choices. And sometimes making good choices, you may not realize the American dream in terms of wealth and producing the best children, or having the best job, or having the best career. Sometimes even people doing the best that they can, being good people doesn't always guarantee them the outcome that they want. So at the end of the day, the only thing that you have that you control are your ideas and your thought process. If you want to rent that space to people who want to feed you with racism and bigotry, to believe that Donald Trump is a bigotry and that people that voted for him had to be ignorant and could not see what you saw, then you will live in that cocoon. But I think that what happened in this presidential election is one of the best things that has happened to the country. No, because Donald Trump did not win. It's the American people who are outraged with the establishment media, outraged with the posters and the pundits, and whose voices have been silent, where they speak out about the issues of immigration, whether it's refugees, whether it's the fact that premiums are soaring with affordable care. These are real issues. And then some people would like to say, well, people are against Obama because he's a black man in the White House. No, there are 700 precincts that voted for Obama in 2004 and 2008 that happened to vote for President-elect Trump in this election. No, people are more concerned about your policies, how it affect their pocketbooks, how it affect their way of life. No one wants to talk about the transgender issue in North Carolina. Really had an impact on a lot of people who happen to be black, who happen to be conservative, who happen to have a different value set. Now, you may talk about race, and some people think that the Republican Party is racist and is bigoted, and they'll make a decision that they won't vote for the Republican Party. But if the Republican Party is ever capable of removing that racial barrier, where people don't see the prism of race and bigotry, you will have a strong two-party system in this country, and many blacks will have a choice in deciding whom they will vote for in these presidential elections and these congressional and statewide elections.
So, by definition of what you just explained, it almost sounds as if you said, I heard you say, I think I heard you say race can sometimes play a role.
Yes, absolutely.
Do you feel as if systemic, and I would even say pervasive, systemic racism no longer exists?
Of course it does.
Oh,
as long as you have human beings, yes. You know, I was watching Professor Bill Gates' PBS series last night.
Yes.
And I thought it was quite profound in many ways, because people like to tend to think that only Republicans and members of the GOP can be racist and hold these bigoted ideas that hold black people back. But you know, there was a scene in his film last night where Martin Luther King Jr. at the time said, you know, I thought Mississippi was racist. In Alabama, I never saw racism until I went to Chicago, which was controlled by Democrats and liberals. And it's the most vicious kind of racism that I've ever seen. So you're telling me that if I call myself a conservative who happens to be black, and if I call myself a Republican, then automatically I am more capable of being racist than somebody who's just say, well, all I got to do is say I'm white and a liberal and I cannot be racist. Racism is not about the label. It's about the actions and the policies that the Democratic Party has put in place, no matter how well intended, and I believe that, have not empowered American blacks in these inner cities and these urban areas. And it's a tragedy and it's a travesty that they find themselves in these kinds of situations where they have no role models. You have these drug-infested neighborhoods. You have a lot of kids having babies out of wedlock. You don't have fathers in the household. And I don't want people to think, well, now he's stereotyping black people. No, I'm stereotyping the overall what's going on in these inner cities. These people are angry, they're upset, they want opportunity. It is inexcusable that in Chicago, it's like Spike Lee said, it's like Chirac. Had a white Republican been in the White House, and had he been from Chicago, and this was happening on his dime, there would be marches, there would be protests, there would be outrage. But President Obama, whom I have tremendous respect for, gets a pass because he happens to be black, and by the civil rights community, so therefore they cannot show their outrage. But those people in Chicago are just as valuable as anybody else. But yet you're telling me it's his hometown, it's his backyard, and you cannot change that situation in your backyard? I don't accept that.
And as president, you say you don't accept that he couldn't change it. How would he have changed it? What would you have suggested that he do to change that situation?
Code blue. You have law enforcement who runs amok. As long as blacks stay in their communities and kill themselves violently, they don't worry about it. But once they cross over into the suburbs where you disrupt the tax bases and the elite, police has a whole different attitude in terms of their arrest, in terms of making sure that you don't have the same kind of situation in those neighborhoods. The mayor has the power to change those situations. You must hold law enforcement accountable. You must do that. You cannot have a code blue if a law enforcement official goes out and commit a crime, like what we saw where the police officers on the tech. They cannot be above the law. It's very difficult for people in any community to respect law enforcement if you have one standard for law enforcement and another standard for the community. Justice must be blind. And law enforcement has a different standard in this country, and that needs to change.
That's certainly an issue that we want to talk about because, we have come through a season, a couple of years or so, when high-profile murders of black men have dominated news cycles week after week, and the reaction to them. So policing is certainly something that I want to explore.
The issue is that in every community, law enforcement represents a little of who we all are. You can come to the studio. I mean, you never know what people are. You can see them, they look fine, but you never know what goes on in their lives. You're going to always have people who are out of control, who are lawless. Law enforcement has an obligation to get that under control. When you go through law enforcement, I've talked to many law enforcement officers, and they tell me when they're in their training, the image of they have of what a criminal is someone who's black, someone who's a young youth. There's a problem with that. That has to change. That has to change on every level. People committing crime has nothing to do with the hue of their skin. It has to do with their behavior. It has to do with the choices that they make. I can understand if you say, well, somebody just had their home broken into and the person had dreadlocks and they were black. I can understand you use that as a description. I understand that. But the wholesale profile, this goes on in at academies and it continues. So in their minds it's etched that if you're looking for a criminal, you're probably looking for someone that is black. That is a problem.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so you're correct in saying that needs to be changed on every level.
Every level.
Okay. So then let's stay with this for a moment then, because certainly one of the feelings of most in the black community is that they are unfairly targeted by police forces all over the country. And it's an overwhelming majority of black Americans who feel that way. Is it your sense that they are missing something when they take that position?
You know, it goes to leadership. I can say this unequivocally. If I were a mayor of a city, and if I were a governor, and I would say this about you, there's no way on my watch that kind of behavior could continue. The problem is leadership is in bed with law enforcement. They value them more than they value the citizens in their community. They're in bed with people don't necessarily who look upon that as a concern that has almost become epidemic. We've worked so hard over these several decades to empower black people to be mayors, to be governors. The problem is that most of these things happen in cities where there are Democratic mayors, where there are Democratic strongholds. And you ask yourself, and you have these city councils, and you ask yourself, how can that happen on your dime and you're a leader? The problem is law enforcement is running these communities, and they don't know how to manage law enforcement. And when you have a law enforcement out of control, this is why you have a system with the prosecutors that when law enforcement officers deserve to be put on trial, deserve to be punished, and some of them deserve the death penalty. If you saw the situation in my town, Charleston, South Carolina, the way that officer shot that brother in the back, that officer deserves to be executed because no longer is he an officer. He is a criminal. He is a murderer. He violated his oath of office, and we must use that as an example. When Dylan Roof was arrested after what happened with the Charleston 9, and my cousin was one of the victims of his crime, they take him out to McDonald's for breakfast and feed him. Can you imagine if he were black, if that would have happened? You don't think people watch that and see the double standard? There is something that is wrong with those pictures. That would not happen with some ordinary person. You just killed and a terrorist attack and assassinate 9 people, and law enforcement is going to take you out to breakfast and feed you? I don't think so. People see that and they lose trust in the system, and they lose trust and faith in law enforcement, and it must change.
Okay, and that is certainly the case when you see that kind
Yes.
of imagery that is so blatant.
Yes.
And you juxtapose
Yes.
the behavior of black men being unarmed black men being
Just in the car.
just unarmed unarmed black men,
Right.
and then those who are armed who happen not to be black being arrested without being murdered. I mean, so when you juxtapose those things, that certainly contributes to the sense of a disparity
And the distrust.
a disparity in distrust
Yes.
and fairness. Okay.
Yes. And that can change.
Yeah. Now, from a policy point of view, you have these. You talked earlier about untoward behavior, making the decisions that you make ultimately determine, what happens in your life, no matter what's going on. However, I'd like to hear you talk about those conditions that for so long in and around the black, in and about throughout the black community, where there is a lack of funding, where there is a lack of schooling, where there is a lack of resources, where there is a lack of jobs. Do you, again, from a political ideological mindset, do you suggest that those conditions don't contribute to the criminal behavior that you spoke of earlier?
One of the things that I think that we don't focus on enough, Rock, is that most people don't commit crime. Most people who grow up in poverty, who grow up in those conditions, don't commit crime. In fact, some of the most successful stories that we have in America comes from those type of conditions. At some point, through faith, through your faith, and just through an angel of mercy that you meet along the way, those circumstances can change. When you studied the history from slavery to de jure segregation to the civil rights movement, and you look at those images and you read books of what slaves endured and what they had to go through just so you and I could sit at this table today and be sort of what the American dream is about. They really suffered. They understood raping their daughters, raping their wives, hanging people on Sunday and after going to church and just sitting under the tree and toasting and celebrating. I mean, listen, that is something that you and I could not even comprehend. You and I would be dead on the first day. The kind of issues that we talk about today, when you compare from what our ancestors had to sacrifice for us to be where we are today, people make choices. And unfortunately, a lot of young people have grown up in environments where this is just a way of life. They've never been taught the values. They've never been taught the virtues. They've never been taught right and wrong. They've never had the example of what it means to have a father. They've never had the example of what it means to be a man, what it means to be a daughter. And this thing has just been perpetrated time and time again. And this is what they become. I was talking to someone recently who's a coach at a leading university. And they were asking me about the policies that these kids can play basketball, but they spend all their time smoking marijuana. And marijuana policy is that you cannot smoke it. If you're an athlete, it's just a no-no. You're suspended or eventually kicked off the team. But what he found out was talking to these kids is that they grew up watching their parents do it. It was a way of life for them. And when you hear about it being legalized in places like Colorado and other places, in their minds, because they have ignorance of the law, they begin to believe it's okay. So are you going to fault and punish them because they grew up? This is all they know. And they try to change that overnight. It's just sometimes virtually impossible. So sometimes we blame these young people, but what it reflects a larger society. Because listen, even in the worst of times, even before we had the civil rights, black families thrived in the 50s and the 40s. They had thriving businesses. 80% of fathers were in the household. It was rare that women had babies out of wedlock. They were more educated then and more literate then than they are today. And if you can survive those circumstances, there is no excuse as to why you cannot survive and thrive in the environment that we're in today, which is the best that we've seen.
You know, I think that you heard a lot in this last campaign about fact checking. I think that we are across the board in all segments of American society today more educated
Yes.
than we were in the 40s, 50s, or any time before now. Remember President Obama giving his commencement address here at Howard University, and he made that point. He made the point of however difficult the challenges of today are, we are in a better position collectively than we've been in past times. That these, in spite of the complaints, in spite of the challenges and the issues, that when you step back from the barrage of the 24-hour news cycle, a whole lot of folks are doing well, that this is a better time than past times. That is true, but there's still so much suffering that exists, that the ability to be able to have an administration to impact all segments of society. You know, we were talking primarily about the inner city, and it is an argument that you often hear, and frankly, I don't think it's an unfair argument to say that look at Baltimore and look at Detroit and look at urban areas that are run by Democratic administrations. I don't think that's unfair. But the same thing can be said for the poorest states in the unions in Mississippi and Arkansas and areas that are Republican strongholds, that the issues of poverty, unemployment, a lack of education. So, you know, I don't want this session of us sitting here at this table to be one talking about only what the problems are. You know, again, my hope was us discussing, you know, ideas that can make things better. Now, so let's move to, well, first let's talk about your client and your friend, Dr. Carson. Dr. Carson ran for office. He stepped off the political merry-go-round, running for president, and and this is very timely us to be talking here today because it was announced yesterday that he was going to forego any pursuit of serving in the Trump administration. Is that correct, first?
Absolutely is correct.
Okay. And why did he make that decision?
There was no decision. He was always said throughout, once he realized that he had no pathway to victory on March 2nd of this year, and he endorsed Mr. Trump, and they were asking him whether there's a quid pro quo. He said, I have no interest in a position. I have no interest in an appointment. But you know, we live in a society where people, because of their egos and because of their resumes and because of access and because of the feel of power, it's a natural thing for us to believe that someone supports a candidate because we want something. Dr. Carson felt at the time that Mr. Cruz nor Mr. Rubio had a pathway to the White House. He felt that Mr. Trump had the best pathway to the White House. And he felt that he wanted to bring the party together. So Dr. Carson, whether it was through his writings, whether it was on TV, has been very vocal about his support for Mr. Trump. Now, I do know we were a week out from the election. We were in Yorktown, Pennsylvania, and we were backstage, and I remember Mr. Trump imploring him, said, Ben, tell us whatever you want, whatever you want. And Dr. Carson, in his very humble way, said, Donald, as I've said it before, I don't want anything. But it was even hard for Mr. Trump to believe that was true.
So Trump kept offering
He
him.
said, whatever you want. And once he won, once we were together on election night in New York. We were all together at Trump Towers with his family and his campaign staff. And once it came to realization that Mr. Trump would win, there were whispers that Dr. Carson's life would change forever. And so everybody, imagine the scene. We're all in the war room at Trump Towers. It's about 1:30 in the morning. None of the networks want to call the election because the Clinton campaign keeps saying, we're going to get votes here, we're going to get votes there, don't call the election. And when it finally became obvious, the AP announced that Mr. Trump would be the next president of the United States. We had to leave to get over to the New York Hilton, where Mr. Trump had to give his speech. And they were gathering everybody, and Dr. Carson and Candid turned to me and said, well, you have a good evening. I said, what do you mean? You got to go over to New York Hilton, you need to be on stage. He said, no, Ken and I are going to bed.
His wife,
yeah,
he and his wife.
Yeah, Ken and I are going to bed. He said, you enjoy yourself. And I said, are you kidding me? He said, no. And then if you remember when Mr. Trump was on stage, he kept saying, where's Ben? Ben, and he kept talking about Ben. Dr. Carson was sleeping because Dr. Carson knew finally he could get a rest. He was elected. And shortly thereafter, Mr. Trump and the campaign and Mr. Pence began to say, Dr. Carson, whatever you want. As he always said, that's not what I want. That's not what I want for my life. I am more effective being a counselor to the president, an advisor to the president, speaking to the people, and having my freedom. If you work for the president, you curtail your freedom. You curtail your ability to speak out. His policies must become your policies. You must advocate what they want you to believe. Dr. Carson's a free man. You cannot script him. He's not going to say what he doesn't believe because he's a principled man. So therefore, Dr. Carson felt that it was in his best interest in the administration that he not play a role, but play one on the outside, as he was an outsider, which he ascended to challenge Mr. Trump, the only one, during the 2006 presidential GOP race. And so he's free, and it's going to remain that way. He has no interest.
So absolutely no formal role.
No.
How about yourself?
Oh, no, absolutely not. I enjoy freedom. And, you know, they got this thing called vetting and going through your background and the FBI checks, which takes 90 days going through your finances, and you never know who get a hold of that information. You know, I don't have all the trust in the government that a lot of people have. You know what? The Lord has blessed me as a owner of television stations across the country. You know, I get to do things that we enjoy. It's a lot of fun. And, you know, I obviously have a lot of close friends in it. Steve Bannon is like a brother to me. I know you heard that name.
Oh, I have heard that name, and I intend to talk about that name.
I want you to talk about my brother because he's my brother.
Okay.
So Steve Bannon, Kellyanne, Jared Kushner, Mr. Trump's son-in-law, you know, we all know each other. I mean, listen, very people thought that the Donald had a chance of winning. And given the kinds of things that he would say, that in the end didn't really matter, He won. And so now he has to deliver. And it's not going to be easy. He has to deliver.
Yeah. Let me set this up this way. You obviously remember when Barack Obama was running for the presidency in 2008. His pastor, Jeremiah Wright, who until that time, most people thought he was one of the most prominent, felt as if he was one of the most prominent, erudite, black liberation theologians in the country. He was highly respected throughout. And he was seen on tape saying, I think if people characterize it correctly, that if America didn't live up to its ideals, that if America didn't take care of its lost and didn't close the naked, that sort of thing, that you don't say God bless America when America behaves that way. You say God damn America. And that's the clip. That's the clip that played and played and played and played and played. And then they found out he was Barack Hussein Obama's pastor. And there was a hue and cry for Obama to repudiate him and to make sure that this man played no further role with Barack Obama. You obviously remember that.
Of course.
Okay. During a debate with Hillary Clinton, with Tim Russert, the name Louis Farrakhan came up, who had said that black Muslims who often weren't voting were supporting Barack Obama. And Obama was really put on the spot to repudiate Louis Farrakhan. Both of those situations were things that he had to do if he wanted to win the presidency. That's reality in America. He had to repudiate both of those people. I think a very fair assessment can be made that whatever you thought about Jeremiah Wright, whatever you thought about Louis Farrakhan, in terms of what the media portrayal of them, what it was, how they had been portrayed, how what you say is your brother, Steve Bannon, has been portrayed, the things that he has said, his helm at Breitbart has unquestionably invited in the most hateful groups, individuals, and organizations that exist in this country. The alt-right, as it is called, champions Breitbart as their platform to spew forth their hatred. Mr. Bannon, again, who you say is your brother, was in charge and ran that for several years and allowed that kind of behavior and activity to take place. You mentioned your cousin tragically being murdered by Dylan Roof in South Carolina, in Charleston, South Carolina. And shortly after that was done, there was a banner headline at the Breitbart News blog about raise that, and Dylan Roof wearing the Confederate flag. And Breitbart, where Mr. Bannon was at the helm, printed a headline, hoist the Confederate flag high, be proud. His wife swearing under oath that he didn't want his kids to go to school with other Jewish kids. So, Farrakhan and Jeremiah Wright, there was no way that Obama could allow them to come to the White House. He would get tarred and feathered and run out of town. But someone who seems to be, something I wrote, I said they were media defined. Farrakhan and Jeremiah Wright were media defined as bigots. Certainly Bannon has been equally or more so defined as by the media as a bigot, he gets access to the White House, in Trump's words, to change the federal, help change the direction of the federal government. There is a term, white supremacy. I wrote something on this, and in what was my estimation, the difference between how Farrakhan and Jeremiah Wright were handled and treated versus a man having access to the White House to change the federal government seemed to be the quintessence of white supremacy. So I'd like for you to help me with this as to the gentleman you call your brother and who is being maligned as a bigot, as an anti-Semite, as a racist, as a misogynist. Help me out here.
Well, you know, it's it's a fair, it's very fair to ask. Listen, just like with President-elect Trump, you can't control who wants to claim you. If they feel there's a nugget that gives them a license for their racism and their bigotry. And also, for me, I've known Steve Bannon for such a long time. I've known the things that we fought together for Ferguson. I own the NBC WEYI in Flint, Michigan, and we've gone back and forth doing many town hall meetings over the water crisis. And I was telling Steve about how it's really impacted minorities in that city. And he said, Armstrong, we're always looking for ways to empower minorities and bring voice. He said, what do you suggest we do? I said, man, it would be great if Mr. Trump was a candidate at the time, if we go to Flint, Michigan. And this was at the spur of the moment. And he said, well, I'll ask him, maybe I'll put something together. I said, no, if we do it, I have to put the trip together because I want to make sure it's right. The water plant and churches. And sure enough, within 24 hours he called, he said, so go. And so, you know, when you have those relationships in those situations, in those inner cities, and also I've seen things that he's done privately, particularly over the last few days with Steve reaching out, saying, look, man, we cannot have a WASP-looking administration. We got to have diversity.
Who said that?
Steve Bannon. We got to have diversity. He said, we've got to get resumes. He said, you know, I know a few people. You know a lot of people. I need you to help us in this regard to make sure that we have diversity in our administration. And so, look, the bottom line here is that Trump has lowered the bar of what it takes to become president. Okay?
That is an understatement. Okay.
And when you can lower the bar
Yeah.
of what it takes to become president, then you lower the bar for those around you. And unlike the president, yes, I mean, the bar is lowered. It's a different bar. If you think about the videos, if you think about the things that he said, I mean, no other person you could imagine would have been elected president. If President Obama had been on that stage in the second debate, stalking Hillary Clinton and breathing like an animal, the way Donald Trump was, the media would have blistered him. So the media is a culprit too. They gave Donald Trump a different pass. There is no way that a black man could have stood on that stage and just walked around that stage just stalking her on the stage. Donald Trump has, another thing about Donald Trump, maybe different from President Obama, he doesn't care what the media or what the establishment class or anybody else says. They're not going to tell him whether he can bring Breitbart in the White House or not. It's his decision. He doesn't care. So chop me up, malign me, I'll take it. Donald Trump's going to do whatever he wants to do.
Okay, so
He doesn't give in to the pressure. He doesn't care about the optics.
All right.
And not many people can survive that kind of pressure for the media. They just can't.
Isn't what you just explained an indictment on why people would vote for Donald Trump then?
No, it's who we are. It's what we've become as a society.
A wise somebody once said, municipalities and nations get the leaders they deserve.
It's who we are. It's been under the rug. Donald Trump didn't bring all this strife and divisiveness. He's the voice that unearthed it to bring it out in the public. He represents. People didn't care about Donald Trump's language. They didn't care about that. That's what we've become as Americans in this country. He's become their voice. And I don't know how anybody could have doubted that Donald Trump would have ever become president, especially after he took out all the Republicans. I mean, Dr. Carson talked about morality. He talked about character. He had temperament. Christians didn't want that. They wanted a bully. They wanted almost a gangster-style president. And so the fact of when he called her nasty on the stage and his poll numbers, they go down, but it would come back up. I mean, it was the perfect storm. This has been brewing for a long time that someone like Donald Trump, Pat Buchanan couldn't make it work, Ross Perot did not make it work. This was the true season for the outsider.
So am I hearing code language, Armstrong, for real serious racial hostility amongst white folks that needed a champion to say what they feel that they felt they haven't been able to say for a very long time?
It's not about race, Rock. President-elect Trump got 13% of black men vote. That's pretty substantial. But it's not about that. It's about the immigration. It's about the refugees. It's about the lack of economic opportunities. It's about NAFTA and jobs leaving this country. It's about the fact that people have to be so politically correct and so careful in what they say and how they say it. And they have to be polite in society. It's about that the people use the F-bomb and sometimes they talk to women in a certain way and sometimes women talk that way and we don't want to bring it out in society because we're supposed to be gentlemen and we're supposed to be ladies. Donald Trump has given people a preview of what they are in their private lives, and he's just brought it out into the open. No, it has far less to do with race. Because listen, Donald Trump, I will tell you this, will never tolerate bigotry or racism in his administration. He just won't. I mean, I'll never forget when the situation happened. I think it was
somebody might push back on you and say that he tolerated it. He and his dad tolerated it in their rental policies.
Many people did during that period in our history. But I'm saying this to you about Donald Trump. The Donald Trump you saw as a candidate will be entirely different than the Donald Trump as president. And you begin to see the signs. In his speech that night where he congratulated Mrs. Clinton, his meeting with President Obama, his backing off, repealing all of affordable care, his backing off and being more reasonable with building the wall, you'll see a different Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a very interesting person. And Donald Trump, bigotry and racism, Donald Trump used to have the best relationships with entertainers in Hollywood. But black people thought he was cool. Absolutely. But this Donald Trump they saw running for president was not the Donald Trump that they knew. You will see Donald Trump who will have the temperament, who will be willing to compromise, who will enforce a lot of the things that he believes in. But I think that Donald Trump has the potential to really do something for these inner cities and urban centers that you haven't seen in a long time.
Then let me stop there so I can so I understand and we don't mess up with some semantics. So he was called quite often a con man. So am I hearing you correctly that the Donald Trump that ran for the presidency said what he said to get elected, but he didn't believe what he was saying?
That's what all politicians do most of the time. He's no different than Mrs. Clinton.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that was different about him, he is very transparent. A lot of it he did not try to hide. He was not scripted. That's who he was. People liked the fact that they felt that's who he is. So you don't have to figure out what he's saying. You don't have to figure out what he's conveying.
Wait a minute.
No matter how raw.
Let's go back. Let's go back for a moment, because you said that the appeal wasn't to race. I think I heard you say that.
No, it wasn't. It was to the anger and the resentment and the establishment, the politicians on the left and the right, and the American people getting hosed.
So
they wanted a revolution without firing a gun.
Mm-hmm.
Donald Trump was their revolutionary leader.
Yeah. Okay. So when George Bush left office, this country was on the verge of collapse in every form and fashion. No one can say that today. It is, I mean, can you fairly assess that how this country is run, the conditions that it is in today is not substantially better than when George Bush left office? And and if I'm right about that, and this black man came in and sort of pulled America back from the brink, that's a success story, and his approval rating is at an all-time high.
You know what? I've never had more respect for our president of the United States than I've had over the last 3 weeks, and how he's handled the transition, his party losing, how he handled the Comey situation. Just a classy, elegant guy, no scandals. I'm telling you, I've never, not because he's black, but because he is so presidential. He's so elegant.
You voted for Obama one time, right?
First time, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll never forget many people talking about Mr. Trump after he met with the president, how impressed he was with his intellect, his sincerity, and how smart that guy was, and how much respect he had for him, and how the president helped him grasp just the burden and the overarching responsibilities and expectations that lie ahead of him.
Mm-hmm. So, is it your opinion that those who Harry Reid yesterday on the floor of the Senate said were horrified, they were mortified? It is indisputable that there have been an uptick, 300, now approaching 400 real incidents of violence, racial, homophobic, and the rest. There, I can tell you, in the barbershop, at some of the soul food restaurants, there are people who are sitting there who are talking chapter and verse about some of these attitudes that Trump appealed to, coming out of the woodwork, and it is very much race-based. There are feelings of, now our man is there, we can unleash our beast.
Not race. The fact that
not race, and no resentment for a black man having been in that powerful position for 8 years.
No, I mean, look at the precincts. No, he wouldn't have won without that constituency. No, listen, you're going to have a few people who may harbor that, but 80 to 90% of the people, no. President Obama rises and falls on his policies, okay? Not on his race. And that's what people don't understand. Most people voting could care less about race. They care about where their lives are. Their premiums are soaring. They're fearful of what kind of future they have for their children. They're fearful about their jobs. They're fearful about the economy. I mean, it's easy to couch it in the race, but to couch it in race, you miss the whole point. The thing about this election is that if you look at the protesters, the majority of them did not even vote. You know, I host a show at night, Sirius 126 Urban View, Monday through Friday. I've never heard so many black people who did not vote for him, who vehemently disagree with him, who say he's our president. It's not black people out there protesting. They're not. It's these young college kids who are protesting, who are angry, and don't even understand what they're protesting about. They ride in on luxury buses that somebody else is financing. And when you talk to me about the violence and the 400 incidents, I think about the fact that during the presidential debate, when Donald Trump challenged Mrs. Clinton over the fact that they planted these protesters, wanted them to get blooded, just to disrupt and create those images on TV. I don't know how much I can buy into that. Because you know what? Whatever Harry Reid says, it's politics. They lost. They're shattered. The Democratic Party is shattered. They were talking about how Hillary Clinton's going to win, but she was leading by 12 percentage points. How she's going to forget about the fact about her playing it safe. She's going to Arizona. She's working on the down ticket. She's going to Republican strongholds. None of that played out. The media set many voters up to believe that Donald Trump did not have a snowball chance in purgatory of winning this election. The media fell down on their responsibilities. And people were in a state of shock, and they're still getting over that shock because they had no idea that the media and the pundits and the posters could get it so wrong. So while you may blame a lot of things, blame the media, the establishment media that did not do their job.
It clearly is, it cannot be disputed what a colossal failure
yes.
across the board that the media participated in. I mean, this was a failure. You know, at one point, Trump was the darling of the media.
Oh, did you read the Pied Piper? Where Mrs. Clinton and her campaign in the WikiLeaks, I don't know if many people know this, they worked with the media. And in their memo, they said, let's make sure that a Ben Carson, a Ted Cruz, a Donald Trump rise. Let's do favorable stories on them, make them look good, because if we get them in the general election, we have the best chance of winning. It was part of that strategy, Rob. They wanted Donald Trump as the nominee, Ben Carson and Ted Cruz. And they got him.
So that's some of what you think that's some of what he talked about in the rigging? Because, look, clearly he enjoyed his front-runner status and how the media focused on him 24
his character, his morals.
24 hours
a day.
Yeah. Across the board. So part of the media's failure was in how they covered him. He was a ratings machine.
Bonanza.
That ratings machine and that ratings bonanza, let's talk about that failure, because part of it was normalizing a behavior that you say really lowered the bar for the presidency.
And because it was lowered, they felt this guy hadn't. Rock, you're my brother. You didn't think there was a chance that Donald Trump could win, especially in places like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan. Mm-hmm. Mrs. Clinton, after her primary, did not go back to Wisconsin. But here's the thing. Donald Trump had been saying all along, these polls are rigged. What they're saying is not true. I remember the week out in Yorktown, Pennsylvania. I was with Mr. Trump and Steve Bannon. And Steve Bannon said, Armstrong, let me show you something. This was before Comey even made this. He had these polls before Comey. He said, Armstrong, this has nothing to do with Comey. We're going to win Michigan. We're going to win Wisconsin. We're going to win North Carolina. And I think we're going to win Pennsylvania. And he said, no matter what these posters are telling you, I'm telling you we're winning. We're already planning the inauguration. We're planning what Mr. Trump is going to do. Don't believe them. And I looked at Trump and I said, wow. He said, Armstrong, that's what Steve is telling me. So they had the same polls that they conducted, that the media, they were also aware of, but they dismissed it.
Mm-hmm. So with this avalanche of criticism about Steve Bannon, you know, when Obama ascended to the presidency, he felt an obligation, and he stepped up to the plate, and he gave a historic speech on race and race relations and the conditions in America. Is that something that a Donald Trump or a Steve Bannon would be prepared to do?
It's being talked about, actually.
Say that again?
It's being talked about.
Tell me some secrets.
Oh, no. I'm just telling you it's being talked about. Donald Trump wants to heal these wounds. He wants to bring this country together. It really disheartens him to see what's going on in America. The America that he soon will become the president of on January 20th, 2017.
Do you understand how some of those people who are so afraid cannot reconcile what you just said about him wanting to bring people together when he uses the kind of language like take them out here on the stretcher, knock the hell out of them?
Of course. Listen, of course we understand. Even with my brother Steve Bannon, who ran Breitbart, I mean, you have reporters writing these stories. I remember the story about the headline about the Confederate flag when my cousin Pinckney, Clemente Pinckney, had been killed and 8 others. And I said, man, he said, Armstrong, we just got to get stories. You should write a story. We got to make sure that we show that this is unacceptable in America. So I wrote stories. Other stories were written, but those stories never get the headlines. This story about the Confederate flag. And listen, we all
do you see what so many in the black community and the progressive community would see, that was the apex of insensitivity with your brother at the helm?
But you know, not just the state of South Carolina on the State House, there are a lot of universities there's still that use the emblem.
But I'm
of
talking
the
about. I'm
Confederate
talking
flag.
about.
But look,
I'm talking about the news agency that he
look.
ran.
The bottom line. Listen, there's a
Would
price.
you say that that was insensitive?
There's a price you have to pay when you associate with those kinds of images that remind America of its ugly racist past and what that Confederate flag symbolized. And I believe this: the Confederacy lost the war, and they don't have the right to wave their relic anywhere. That flag, they were defeated, and so there's a price you pay. There's a price.
Have you said that to your brother?
Oh, they know it. Oh, absolutely. We have these debates all the time. Yes, of course. Look, listen, I have a pretty big business, okay? A lot of television stations. We hire a lot of people. 52% of my employees are black, okay? I see my brothers and sisters every day. I see some of the brightest, some of the best people with character, with high morals, with decency. I see it every day. That's the environment that I'm in.
Thank you very much for coming. We didn't have enough time.
Yes.
Got to get you back again.
Yes.
That wraps us for this evening. For more information on this program or any other program produced by WHUT, go to WHUT.org. Goodbye, God bless, and we'll see you the next time.
This program was produced by WHUT, Howard University Television, and made possible by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.